Marta, I can't tell you how excited we are to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us again. And also, very recently, you've agreed to join us as an advisor to Foresight, which we could not be more delighted about. So thank you so much. It really means the world. I think the vision and the mission that you and the various orgs that you're involved with are like pursuing, and the kind of like, the extreme dedication that you have to really like building decentralized, secure, privacy preserving, civil liberty preserving structures is absolutely unique. And so thanks for all the work that you've done. Perhaps you can maybe give people that might not know Marta a bit of an intro to your work at Filecoin, why you're preserving humanity's most important information, what people can look forward to in that world, and then we tickle all the various different hats that you're wearing. Hopefully we'll get to them.
Yes, absolutely. So I serve as the president and chair of Filecoin Foundation. So we're the governance body for the Filecoin network. Filecoin is a decentralized file storage network. You can think of it a little bit like Airbnb for file storage. So people store their files on other people's computer hardware and get paid for doing so using Filecoin. Filecoin is able to check and make sure the files are being stored reliably over time. And it sounds like a little bit like a niche use case when you put it that way, but we really see this as sort of the fundamental base for preserving humanity's most important information and building the next generation of the web. On today's internet, if you go to any particular website, it's almost certainly being stored on a server that's owned by Amazon, Microsoft, or Google, right? And you really have no way of knowing whether that file is going to be pulled down. And you can often see like some server goes down somewhere, and then suddenly like people's smart toasters stop working. Like there's all sorts of internet outages that really show that today's internet is not as reliable and robust as it should be. And so we really see Filecoin as a way of being a foundational technology for the next generation of the web.
Yeah, wonderful. And do you want to give people that might not know, who here knows what Filecoin is doing deeply? Okay, cool. But many of you might not. So do you want to give people maybe a few highlights of the work that you've done this year? I know, for example, another recent board member that joined us on the advisory board is Molly McKinley, also from Filecoin. And together, I think you've hosted not only plenty of events throughout the last year, but you've also done so much project collaboration, so much funding in the ecosystem in really fantastic ways. Do you want to share just a few of the projects that people could, get excited about?
So my personal favorite project, which is very foresighty, is actually a space-related project. So Filecoin is based on an underlying protocol that's called the Interplanetary File System, or IPFS. So that's it sounds like kind of just like a cutesy name, but actually it's called the Interplanetary File System because it was envisioned from the beginning as a technology that can actually be better for networking in space. The reason for that is if today's version of the web, the way it works basically is you're going to a particular place in a particular server and looking for a file there. And that's not a big deal if you're on Earth and you're not talking about huge distances, but as soon as you're like on Mars or on the moon, you're really, really far away. There's going to be a huge latency every single time you're going back and forth to Earth to get data. So it makes a lot more sense to actually just say, I'm looking for X file, and IPFS does that using a content ID. I'm looking for this particular content ID, and then just pulling it from wherever's closest. And so that's how IPFS works. You're able to sort of either if your device has already downloaded it, or whatever, a nearby lunar station or a passing satellite has that particular file, it can pull it from there. So it's just a much better way of doing networking in space. There are a couple of other reasons it's better. One of them being that one of the big problems with storing files in space is they get corrupted very easily. So it's much better to have like multiple copies and just pull from whichever one isn't corrupted. Variety of other reasons that this is really great technology for space. And we were really excited that this year we were actually able to, after 3 years of collaborating with Lockheed Martin Space, finalize an implementation of IPFS for space and actually deploy it in space. So that was one of my personal favorite highlights from the year. Very foresighty in the kind of way that it's multiple disciplines coming together.
When I first heard about it, I was like, oh wow, if there's ever a possible project, it's that one. Because especially connecting crypto in space, it seems to be, or like, at least like a physical open source infrastructure in space, that seems difficult, and I think you nailed it. All right, well, maybe we talked a little bit about Filecoin. I also want to you have like a pretty big lawyer hat on as well, right? And you're quite involved in crypto, making better policies for crypto, advocating for better policies, coming up with better policies, and not just internally for the orgs that you're affiliated with, but also I think in general, including going to Congress, etc. Could you give us perhaps a little bit of an outlook of how do you think about kind of like the intersection of policy and technology going forward? Are there a few principles and how you think about that?
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about cryptocurrency regulation and technology regulation in general, I think that the thing that people kind of get wrong is talking about regulation of a technology. If someone commits a fraud, for example, it doesn't matter whether they committed fraud using the US dollar or cryptocurrency or the telephone or email. Like, the technology itself doesn't matter. What matters is the activity. And so from my perspective, when you're talking about regulating a technology, instead of talking about regulating that technology, you should be really talking about regulating activities. And I think when you start looking at regulating activities and when you start looking at and thinking about it that way, you start seeing that there's actually quite a lot of laws already in place that apply to almost every new technology. And sometimes those need to be updated or changed or clarified, but almost always it doesn't necessarily make sense to come in and have a new set of regulations for a particular technology.
Yeah, it's so funny that, oftentimes people come up, especially in AI safety, AI governance, with these kind of really wild concepts and ideas, but, there is already legal precedent to some extent that we have to be building on. And so I think whenever I talk to lawyers, they have just a very different, pretty sober, pretty action-oriented perspective on where we could be going with the policy we have. Okay, wonderful. If you just look ahead, especially, I guess you're pretty crypto focused and focused on decentralized systems, but now that AI has become, such a big part, especially of, I guess, the way that we build technology, the way that it influences technology, are there any kind of risks that you foresee that we, should be building for, especially as it pertains to civil liberties, et cetera? Or are there also any pretty exciting things where you're oh, if we could just build more of that stuff, that would be a pretty good world?
Yeah, so I'm really worried about the sort of backlash and knee-jerk reaction I've seen with AI technologies involving copyright and sort of this sort of new resurgence of what feels to me like surprising IP maximalism. So for me, I think it's really important to understand that when humans go and read things on the internet, look at things, learn from them, that is obviously fair use, right? And fair use is, of course, a US concept, but just sticking with that concept for now, there are really hard-fought precedents that a lot of people worked really hard to sort of make sure we got, which will enable things like Google, right? And enable all sorts of technologies and keep us from a world where data and information is completely siloed. Those are really important precedents and also really important underlying principles. And so for me, I see a lot of knee-jerk reaction to AI saying, oh, AI should not be able to do the same thing that humans do and go and sort of see what's out there, read it, learn from it, and really just learn. So I think it's really, really important. Brewster Kahle actually, 10 years ago, a long time ago, coined the term, let the robots read. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important that we let the robots read. And I think that's really important legal precedent. And I really have a lot of concern about, I think, the way that sort of a knee-jerk reaction to the technology, which may be seated in something other than IP, that the sort of reaction to that is, well, we should solve this by asserting more firmly copyright. Yeah,
that's going to be an ongoing fight, I think. All right, is there anything that you want to leave people with in terms of actionable items? If you want to draw the attention to specific things that they should be looking out for, either in terms of projects that you are doing, or just in terms of legislation that might come up, or any other bits and pieces that they can integrate into their personal life.
Yeah, so I would say there's a lot to say. I think this is a really big year for decentralized technologies. I think when it comes to sort of regulating activities, as I was talking about just now, there are areas where, particularly in the decentralized technology space, because of a sort of overreach of regulators, we actually do need Congress to step in and actually clarify what the laws are, again, specifically because of a regulatory overreach. And so I think that's going to be a really big thing this year. So definitely keep your eye out for really important moves forward that can really enable a lot of decentralized technologies like Filecoin this year in the US policy landscape.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with the new administration for sure. All right, any questions, comments from any one of you guys? Yeah, just shout it out.
PFS allows the blacklist of nodes that appears in case of censorship. And so I was thinking, how do you think about censorship resistance? And do you ever see IPFS node software that is completely permissive?
Yeah, so censorship resistance is something that's really important, as well as sort of just content policy generally. Like, how do you do content policy on Filecoin? So there's a set of sort of as you know, both are completely open source, and there's a set of open source projects that are actually building on top of Filecoin and IPFS that actually do content policy in a really interesting decentralized way. So the idea is, one of them, for example, is called Murmuration Labs, which has built some tools. And the idea is basically that people can curate lists of content, and maybe that list is based on sort of jurisdiction, or maybe it's in partnership with some sort of organization. Like, for example, there's they've worked with organizations that are sort of along the lines of like NCMEC, which pertains to sort of child exploitation images. But whatever those sort of deny lists are, those lists of sort of content that you would want to deny, it enables people at the gateway level to be able to actually say, I'm going to subscribe to those lists, basically, and then block that content. And then that content gets blocked at the gateway layer, which you can think of sort of analogized to like blocking particular content at the browser layer. So like, to analogize, if you're going to a particular place, the browser is the thing that actually is sort of determining what you're seeing and not seeing. So it's a different and interesting way of doing content moderation, and a really cool way to do it in a decentralized way. And then because it's open source, there's all sorts of other like opportunities to build other ways of doing content moderation on top of the technology.
Wow, awesome. Well, we are roughly at time. Will you be hanging out again?
I will be here. Yeah, it's so nice to see you all, and I'd love to chat more.
Well, thanks for all the work that you're doing. It really means a lot. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison.